The dust swirled across the barren landscape as Fiona McKinley clutched her feverish infant to her breast, tears streaming down her dirt-smudged face. The 6-month-old boy's labored breathing sent waves of panic through her body, each tiny wheeze more terrifying than the last. She had fled east after her husband's death, seeking solace in the promise of a new beginning, but the merciless frontier seemed determined to take everything she loved. "Please, Samuel," she whispered to her baby, whose once rosy cheeks had turned ashen gray. "Hold on for Mama, please hold on." The year was 1877, and the unforgiving Texas territory had little mercy for a widow with a sick child. 3 days of raging fever had reduced her son to a limp, whimpering bundle, his small body burning with an intensity that frightened her to her core. She had tried everything cool compresses, the herbal remedies her mother had taught her, fervent prayers that seemed to dissipate in the hot, dusty air, but nothing eased his suffering. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her look up from where she sat on the weathered porch of her small homestead. A tall figure on horseback emerged from the shimmering heat waves, his silhouette growing more distinct as he approached. The stranger dismounted with the easy grace of a man who'd spent his life in the saddle, his spurs jingling as his boots hit the hard-packed dirt. "Madam," he said, removing his hat to reveal sun-bleached brown hair and concerned blue eyes. "I was passing by and, is everything all right?" Fiona clutched Samuel tighter, years of frontier wariness making her hesitant, but the desperation of a mother knows no bounds. "My baby," she managed. "He's sick, so sick, I don't know what to do." The man approached carefully, his weathered face softening as he saw the infant. He knelt before her, respectfully keeping some distance. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward the child with trembling hands. Fiona loosened her grip, allowing the stranger a closer look. His large, calloused hand gently touched Samuel's forehead, and his expression grew grave. "Name's Matthew Blackwood," he said, his voice steady and sure. "I've seen this before. Your boy needs a doctor, and quick." "There's no doctor for 50 miles, Fiona said, her voice cracking. I don't have a horse fast enough. I tried to cool him down, but nothing works." Matthew stood, his jaw set with determination. "I'll find a doctor and ride until he comes," he declared, already moving toward his horse. "My stallion Thunder can make it to Silver Creek by nightfall." "Wait," Fiona called, struggling to her feet with Samuel in her arms. "I don't even know you." "Why would you help us?" Matthew paused, one foot in the stirrup. His eyes met hers, and something passed between them, an understanding, perhaps, of the loneliness that pervaded frontier life. "Because no one should face this wilderness alone, madam," he said simply. "What's your name?" "Fiona." "Fiona McKinley," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "And this is Samuel." "Well, Mrs. McKinley, you keep that boy cool as best you can. I'll be back with help before the sun rises tomorrow." He swung into the saddle and gathered the reins. "You have my word." Before Fiona could respond, Matthew had spurred his horse forward, disappearing in a cloud of dust as he raced toward the horizon. She watched until he was nothing more than a speck in the distance, her heart divided between hope and fear. "He'll come back," she whispered to Samuel, not entirely convinced herself. He promised. Inside her small cabin, Fiona laid Samuel in his cradle and soaked a cloth in the coolest water she could find. The afternoon stretched into evening, each minute feeling like an eternity as she bathed her son's burning skin and whispered soothing words. She thought of Matthew Blackwood, the determination in his eyes. In the 2 years since her husband Thomas had been killed by outlaws, Fiona had learned to be wary of strangers, especially men with guns riding fine horses. But there was something about Matthew that inspired trust, perhaps the way he had looked at Samuel with genuine concern, or how he hadn't hesitated to offer help. As night fell, Samuel's condition worsened. His tiny chest heaved with each breath, and his cries had weakened to pitiful whimpers that tore at Fiona's heart. She paced the floor with him, singing lullabies through her tears, praying for the sound of approaching horses. "Please, God," she whispered into the darkness. "Please don't take my boy too." Miles away, Matthew Blackwood pushed his stallion harder than he ever had before, the The powerful animal responded to his urgency, hooves pounding a desperate rhythm against the hard, packed earth. Silver Creek was still hours away, and each minute counted. Matthew was no stranger to loss. 8 years ago, he had watched helplessly as fever took his younger sister, her passing made more bitter by the knowledge that a doctor might have saved her. Since then, he had wandered the territories, working as a ranch hand, occasionally as a scout, never staying in one place long enough to form attachments. Yet something about the young widow and her ailing child had struck a chord within him. He reached Silver Creek well after midnight, the small town silent under the star-filled sky. Without hesitation, he rode directly to the doctor's house at the edge of town, dismounting before thunder had fully stopped and pounding on the door with urgent fists. "Doc Wilson," he shouted. "Wake up. It's an emergency." After several agonizing moments, a light appeared in the window, and the door opened to reveal a disheveled older man with spectacles perched on his nose. "What in tarnation?" the doctor began. "There's a woman with a sick baby about 40 miles west of here," Matthew interrupted. "The child's burning with fever, struggling to breathe. They need help now." Dr. Wilson rubbed his eyes. 40 miles at this hour. "I can't possibly." "You can and you will," Matthew insisted, his voice dropping to a dangerous low. "I've got a fresh horse for you from the livery. We leave in 10 minutes. Something in Matthew's expression must have conveyed his determination, for the doctor sighed and nodded. "Let me gather my supplies." True to his word, the doctor was ready in minutes, a leather medical bag clutched in his hands. Matthew had indeed procured a second horse, and soon they were galloping back the way he had come, the doctor struggling to keep pace. "The woman, what's her condition, doctor?" Wilson shouted over the thunder of hooves. "She's holding on," Matthew replied, "but the child is fading fast. Fever, labored breathing, couldn't be more than 6 months old." The doctor's expression grew grave. "Could be pneumonia, common in these parts, especially for the little ones. We need to hurry." They rode through the night, stopping only to rest the horses briefly. As the first light of dawn painted the eastern sky, Matthew recognized the landmarks near Fiona's homestead. His heart pounded with a mixture of hope and dread. Had they been fast enough, Fiona had not slept. She sat in the rocking chair by the window, Samuel clutched to her chest, watching the horizon. When the first hints of movement appeared in the distance, she thought her exhausted mind was playing tricks on her. But then the shapes resolved into 2 riders, moving at speed toward her cabin. He had come back. Against all odds, the stranger had kept his word. Fiona stumbled to the door, her legs numb from the long night's vigil. Samuel was barely responsive now, his small body radiating heat like a stove. She stepped onto the porch just as Matthew and an older man reined their horses to a stop in front of her cabin. "Mrs. McKinley," Matthew said, dismounting in one fluid motion. "This is Dr. Wilson from Silver Creek." The doctor was already hurrying toward her, medical bag in hand. "Let me see the child, madam," he said gently. Fiona reluctantly surrendered Samuel to the doctor's arms. "He's gotten worse," she said, her voice hoarse with exhaustion. "He stopped crying about an hour ago, just lies there burning up." Dr. Wilson carried Samuel inside, Fiona close behind. Matthew remained outside, unsure of his place now that he had fulfilled his promise. He tended to the horses, watering them and removing their saddles, all the while straining to hear any news from inside the cabin. After what seemed an eternity, the door opened, and Dr. Wilson emerged. Matthew straightened, searching the man's face for any sign of the child's fate. "Pneumonia, as I suspected," the doctor said, wiping his hands on a cloth. "I've given him medicine to reduce the fever and help his breathing. It's fortunate you found me when you did, Mr. Blackwood. A few more hours and—" He left the sentence unfinished, but the implication was clear. "Will he recover?" Matthew asked, surprised by how much the answer mattered to him. "With proper care, yes, but he'll need constant attention for several days. I'll stay until tomorrow to monitor his progress." Relief flooded through Matthew. "And Mrs. McKinley?" "Exhausted, but strong," Dr. Wilson replied with a small smile. "She refuses to rest until she's certain the boy is improving. Perhaps you could convince her to get some sleep while I watch over the child." Matthew nodded, though he doubted his ability to persuade the determined mother. He entered the cabin hesitantly, finding Fiona seated beside Samuel's cradle, her face pale with fatigue but her eyes alert, focused entirely on her son. "Mrs. McKinley," he said softly. She looked up, and for the first time he noticed her eyes were a striking shade of green, like spring grass after rain. "You came back," she said simply. "I gave my word. You saved my son's life." Her voice caught, and tears welled in her eyes. "I don't know how to thank you." Matthew shifted uncomfortably under her gratitude. "No need for thanks. Anyone would have done the same." "No," she said firmly. "They wouldn't. I've been alone out here for 2 years since my husband died. Neighbors are few and far between, and most pass by without a glance." She stood, swaying slightly with exhaustion. "You're a good man, Matthew Blackwood." Before he could respond, Dr. Wilson entered with a steaming cup. "Drink this, Mrs. McKinley," he instructed. "It will help you rest. I'll watch over Samuel." Fiona hesitated, glancing at her son. "The doctor's right," Matthew found himself saying. "You need sleep to take care of your boy. I'll stay to make sure everything's looked after." Something in his words seemed to reassure her, for she accepted the cup and drank its contents. Within minutes, her eyelids began to droop, and Matthew guided her to the small bed in the corner of the cabin. She was asleep almost instantly, her features softening in repose. Years seemed to fall away from her face. Matthew stepped back, oddly affected by the sight of her. She couldn't be more than 25, he realized, too young to have endured so much hardship alone. "You've done a good thing today," Dr. Wilson said quietly, interrupting his thoughts. "That boy would have died without your intervention." Matthew nodded, uncomfortable with the praise. "I'll check on the livestock," he said, heading for the door. "Let me know if you need anything." Outside, the morning sun had risen fully, bathing the modest homestead in golden light. Matthew surveyed the property with a critical eye. The cabin was small but solidly built, the yard swept clean despite Fiona's obvious exhaustion. A few chickens scratched in the dirt, and a milk cow lowed softly from a small corral. It was a hard-won piece of frontier life, maintained by a woman's determination alone. In the barn, he found a mule and an old plow horse, both in need of care. He set about feeding and watering the animals, cleaning stalls, and making repairs to a broken fence section. The physical labor was welcome, giving his hands purpose while his mind grappled with unfamiliar emotions. He had not planned to stay beyond delivering the doctor, yet here he was, assuming responsibility for a stranger's homestead. For a woman and child he had met only yesterday. Something about Fiona McKinley's courage and her fierce love for her son resonated with him, stirring feelings long buried beneath years of solitary wandering. By mid-afternoon, he had completed what chores he could find and returned to the cabin to check on his charges. "Doctor." Wilson was dozing in a chair but woke at Matthew's entrance. "The fever's beginning to break," the doctor reported with satisfaction. "The medicine is working, and Mrs. McKinley is still sleeping." Poor woman was completely exhausted. Matthew nodded, relieved. "I'll make some coffee," he offered, moving toward the small stove. As he worked, he found himself glancing frequently at Fiona's sleeping form, and then at the cradle where Samuel rested more peacefully now. The cabin was modest but clean, with small touches that spoke of Fiona's determination to create a home. Wildflowers in a jar on the table, a carefully mended quilt on the bed, a child's wooden toy that someone had lovingly carved. Later, as the afternoon waned toward evening, Fiona finally stirred. She sat up abruptly, maternal instinct immediately driving her to Samuel's side. "He's better," Dr. Wilson assured her, pointing out the reduced fever and improved breathing. "The worst has passed, though he'll need careful nursing for several days." Fiona sagged with relief, tears spilling down her cheeks as she gently stroked her son's cheek. Only then did she seem to notice Matthew's presence, her eyes widening in surprise. "You're still here," she said. "Thought you might need a hand with things," he replied, suddenly self-conscious. "Fed the animals, fixed that broken corral fence." Gratitude bloomed across her features. "You must be hungry. Let me make something." "Already done," he interrupted, gesturing to the pot of stew simmering on the stove. Found some venison in your smokehouse, hope that's all right. Fiona's expression was one of wonderment, as though unused to such consideration. More than all right, she said softly. Thank you. That evening they shared a simple meal, the doctor regaling them with tales from his 20 years of frontier medicine. Fiona laughed at his humorous stories, the sound transforming her face and making Matthew's heart beat faster. Samuel slept peacefully in his cradle, his breathing easier, his color slowly returning. As darkness fell, the doctor retired to the barn where Matthew had prepared a makeshift bed, leaving the two adults alone in the cabin's warm glow. An awkward silence fell between them, filled with unspoken questions. "Will you leave tomorrow?" Fiona finally asked, her hands busy with mending. Matthew hesitated. He had always moved on, never staying in one place long enough for roots to form. Yet the thought of riding away from this cabin, from this woman and her child, left an unexpected hollow feeling in his chest. "Thought I might stay a few days," he said carefully. "Make sure you and the boy are settled. There's that broken plow in the barn needs fixing, and your roof could use some patching before the rainy season." Fiona's hands stilled, and she looked up at him with those remarkable green eyes. "I can't pay you," she said frankly. "Not with money, anyway." "Not asking for payment," Matthew replied, "just seems the right thing to do." She studied him for a long moment, as though trying to decipher a complicated text. "Most men passing through want something," she said finally, "or they don't stop at all." "I'm not most men," he said simply. "And I've already stopped." A small smile touched her lips. "No," she agreed, "you're not most men." The next morning, Dr. Wilson pronounced Samuel well on his way to recovery, though he warned that pneumonia often left children vulnerable to relapse. He provided Fiona with medicine and instructions before departing, promising to return in a week to check on his young patient. "You've got a good man there," the doctor said quietly to Fiona as Matthew helped saddle his horse. "Don't see his kind often in these parts." Fiona blushed, glancing at Matthew's tall figure by the corral. "He's just passing through," she said, though she wasn't certain that was true anymore. "Maybe," the doctor replied with a knowing smile, "but sometimes a man finds a reason to stop passing through." After the doctor's departure, a routine emerged. Matthew worked from dawn till dusk, repairing and improving the homestead with the skill of a man familiar with frontier life. Fiona tended to Samuel, who grew stronger each day, his bright blue eyes following Matthew's movements with curious interest. In the evenings, they shared meals and conversation, slowly revealing pieces of themselves to each other. Matthew learned that Fiona had come west from Pennsylvania with her husband Thomas, full of dreams for a new life. Thomas had been killed by bandits while traveling to a nearby town for supplies, leaving his pregnant wife alone to fend for herself and their unborn child. "Some neighbors helped at first," Fiona explained one night as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "But most had their own hardships to face. Eventually, I learned to manage on my own." "You've done more than manage," Matthew said, genuine admiration in his voice. "Most men couldn't have accomplished what you have." She smiled at that, a real smile that reached her eyes. "And you, what's your story, Matthew Blackwood? Why does a man with your capabilities wander from place to place instead of building something of his own?" Matthew was silent for a long moment, watching the fading light. "Lost my family young," he finally said. "Pa to a mining accident, ma to consumption, had a sister Laura. She died of fever when she was 12. I was 20, supposed to be looking after her." The old guilt washed over him. "No doctor within 50 miles. By the time I got help, it was too late." Fiona's hand moved to cover his where it rested on the porch railing. "Is that why you rode so hard for Samuel?" she asked softly. He nodded, unable to speak for the unexpected emotion tightening his throat. "You saved him," she said, her fingers warm against his skin. "You did for my son what you couldn't do for your sister." The simple truth of her words unlocked something in Matthew's chest, a knot of grief and guilt he had carried for 8 years. He looked down at their hands, then at her face, softened by the twilight. "After Laura died, I couldn't see the point in settling anywhere," he continued. Worked cattle drives, did some scouting for the army, odd jobs here and there. Never stayed more than a season. And now, Fiona asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Their eyes met, and Matthew felt the familiar urge to move on battle with a newer, stronger desire to stay. Now I'm not sure, he admitted. The days stretched into weeks, and still Matthew remained. The broken plow was fixed, the roof patched, the fences mended. He cleared additional land for planting, repaired the well, and built a proper crib for Samuel, who was now fully recovered and growing stronger each day. More significant than the physical improvements to the homestead were the changes in its inhabitants. Fiona stood straighter, smiled more readily, sang as she worked. Samuel thrived under the attention of both adults, his delighted laughter becoming a common sound around the property. And Matthew, to his own surprise, found himself thinking of the future in terms of seasons and harvests, rather than the next town or job. He caught himself watching Fiona as she moved through her daily tasks, admiring her strength, her gentleness with Samuel, the way sunlight caught in her auburn hair when she worked in the garden. One evening in early summer, nearly 2 months after his arrival, Matthew returned from hunting to find Fiona teaching Samuel to stand, supporting the boy's tiny hands as he wobbled on unsteady legs. The sight stopped Matthew in his tracks, mother and child framed in the golden light spilling from the cabin door, their faces alight with shared joy. Something shifted in his heart then, a recognition that what he had been searching for in his years of wandering was right here before him, not a place, but people. A family. That night, after Samuel was asleep, Matthew joined Fiona on the porch as had become their custom. The air was warm, scented with wildflowers and pine, the vast canopy of stars stretching overhead in breathtaking display. "I received a letter today," Fiona said, breaking their comfortable silence. "From my sister in St. Louis. She's been asking me to join her there since Thomas died." Matthew felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. "You're leaving?" She turned to face him, her expression unreadable in the darkness. "I've refused her offers before. The thought of abandoning what Thomas and I built, it seemed like giving up." She paused. "But lately I've been wondering if staying is fair to Samuel. He should have opportunities I can't provide here, education, a safer life." "Is that what you want?" Matthew asked, his voice rougher than he intended. To go to St. Louis, Fiona was silent for a long moment. "I want what's best for my son," she finally said, "but I've also come to realize that what's best for him isn't necessarily a place." She took a deep breath. "It's people who love him, who are willing to ride through the night to save him when he's sick, who build him cradles and teach him to fish in the creek." Matthew's heart pounded as he understood what she was saying. "Fiona, you've never said how long you're staying," she interrupted, a new vulnerability in her voice. "I need to know, Matthew. Is this just another place you're passing through?" He reached for her hand, enfolding it in his larger one. "I stopped passing through the moment I saw you holding Samuel on this porch," he admitted. "I just didn't know it yet." Her eyes widened, hope blooming across her features. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I love you, Fiona McKinley," Matthew declared, the words feeling right and true on his lips. "I love your son, and if you'll have me, I'd like to stay not as your hired hand but as a husband and father." He paused, suddenly uncertain. "That is, if you could come to feel something for a wandering cowboy who's finally found his way home." Tears welled in Fiona's eyes, but her smile was radiant. "I already do," she whispered. "I think I started falling in love with you the moment you promised to find a doctor for my son and then kept that promise against all odds." Matthew drew her to him then, his kiss gentle at first, then deepening as she responded with unexpected passion. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "I don't have much to offer," he said honestly. "Just these hands and my word that I'll work every day to make a good life for you and Samuel." "It's more than enough," Fiona assured him, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "We'll build something beautiful together." They were married 2 weeks later by the traveling preacher who visited the scattered homesteads every month. The ceremony was simple, attended only by Dr. Wilson and a few neighbors who had come to know and respect the couple during Matthew's stay. Samuel, now nearly 8 months old and on the verge of walking, was held by Dr. Wilson during the ceremony, his happy babbling providing a joyful accompaniment to the solemn vows. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Matthew kissed his bride with a tenderness that brought tears to the eyes of even the most weathered frontier dwellers present. That night, after their guests had departed and Samuel slept peacefully in his new crib, Matthew took Fiona's hand and led her outside. The summer night was perfect, warm and star-filled, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of prairie wildflowers. "I have something to show you," he said, guiding her toward the barn. Inside, illuminated by lantern light, stood a wagon not new but solid and well-crafted with a fresh coat of paint and a canvas cover. "Matthew?" Fiona questioned, running her hand along the polished wood. "I know you've been worried about Samuel's future," he explained. "Education, opportunities. Silver Creek is growing. They've built a proper school now, and there's talk of a railroad coming through in a few years." He took her hands in his. "I thought we could take the wagon into town every Sunday, let Samuel get used to being around other children. And when he's old enough for schooling, we could either move closer or figure out a way for him to board with a family there during the week." Fiona's expression was one of wonder. "You've thought about all this every day since you mentioned your sister's letter," he admitted. "I want to give you and Samuel everything you deserve, Fiona. I may not have much, but I promise you'll never have to face this frontier alone again." She threw her arms around his neck, kissing him with a fervor that took his breath away. "I love you, Matthew Blackwood," she whispered against his lips. "You've given us so much more than you know." As summer turned to fall and then to winter, the Blackwood homestead thrived under the care of its united family. Matthew's skills as a rancher and hunter, combined with Fiona's knowledge of farming and homemaking, created a prosperity they had not dared dream of individually. Samuel grew rapidly, taking his first steps on Christmas Day, much to his parents' delight. His vocabulary expanded just as quickly. Mama and Papa soon followed by a steady stream of words that revealed his curious and intelligent nature. By the following spring, their hard work had paid off in tangible ways. The small herd of cattle Matthew had purchased with his savings had grown, providing a steady income. Fiona's garden yielded abundant produce, and the orchard they had planted together promised future harvests. More meaningful than their material success, however, was the deep bond that had formed between them. Matthew, who had once been unable to imagine staying in one place, now found contentment in the daily rhythms of home and family. Fiona, who had faced the frontier's hardships alone for so long, blossomed in the security of a loving partnership. One evening in early May, as they sat on the porch watching Samuel chase fireflies in the yard, Fiona turned to her husband with a mysterious smile. "I have news," she said, her voice trembling slightly with excitement. Matthew raised an eyebrow, waiting. "Dr. Wilson confirmed it yesterday when he came to check on Mrs. Peterson's new baby," she continued, taking his hand and placing it gently on her stomach. "We're going to have another child come winter." Joy surged through Matthew, so intense it momentarily robbed him of speech. Instead, he gathered his wife into his arms, burying his face in her hair to hide the tears that sprang to his eyes. "Are you happy?" Fiona asked, pulling back to search his face. "Happier than I ever thought possible," he answered truthfully. "When I found you and Samuel that day, I was just passing through with no destination in mind. I never imagined I was actually finding my way home." "When Samuel was so sick," Fiona confessed, "I thought I would lose everything I had left. Instead, I gained a whole new life." She leaned against him, watching their son's delighted exploration of the twilight world. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't ridden by our cabin that day?" Matthew tightened his arm around her shoulders. "I believe some things are meant to be, no matter the path we take to get there," he said. "But I'm grateful every day that I took the road that led to you." As darkness fell, they called Samuel to them, the three soon-to-be 4 Blackwoods silhouetted against the warm light spilling from their cabin. Inside awaited the simple comforts of home, made profound by the love that had transformed a chance encounter into a shared destiny. That night, as Fiona slept beside him, Matthew found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. From the loneliness of his wandering years to the fullness of his present life, the transformation seemed both miraculous and inevitable. A baby had lain weak in a mother's desperate arms, and a cowboy's promise to find help had changed not only the child's fate, but his own. The seasons continued their eternal cycle, marking the passage of time with changing colors and temperatures. By late fall, Fiona's pregnancy was well advanced, her belly round beneath her apron as she moved through her daily tasks with the same determination that had first captured Matthew's heart. Samuel, now approaching his second birthday, had grown into a sturdy, talkative toddler with his mother's green eyes and a curiosity that kept both parents constantly alert. He followed Matthew everywhere, attempting to mimic his father's work with miniature versions of tools Matthew crafted for him. "Papa, look," became Samuel's favorite phrase, his delight in discovery infectious. The prosperity of the homestead continued to grow. With help from neighbors, Matthew had built in addition to the cabin 2 new rooms that would accommodate their expanding family. The cattle herd now numbered 30 head, and Matthew's reputation as a fair dealer had spread throughout the region, bringing offers of partnership from larger ranching operations. He declined them all, preferring the independence of his own land and the precious hours with his family to the promise of greater wealth. The bitter loneliness of his wandering years had taught him the true value of what he now possessed, not in acres or cattle, but in the love of a woman who had faced frontier hardships with courage, and a child who looked up to him with unquestioning trust. In early December, as the first snows blanketed the landscape in pristine white, Fiona went into labor. Unlike Samuel's birth, which she had endured alone, this time she had Matthew by her side, his strength supporting her through the long hours of pain. Dr. Wilson arrived just in time, having fought his way through the snowstorm at Matthew's urgent summons. The elderly physician's experienced hands guided their daughter into the world, her lusty cries filling the cabin as the first light of dawn illuminated the new fallen snow. "A girl," the doctor announced, placing the swaddled infant in Fiona's trembling arms, strong and healthy as her brother was. Matthew knelt beside the bed, overcome with emotion as he gazed at his daughter's perfect face. "She's beautiful," he whispered, gently touching the downy hair that already showed hints of Fiona's auburn color. "Just like her mother." Fiona looked up at him, exhaustion and joy mingling in her eyes. "What shall we name her?" Matthew thought for a moment, then said softly, "Laura." "After my sister." Tears welled in Fiona's eyes and she nodded. "Laura McKinley Blackwood," she agreed. "A beautiful name for our beautiful girl." Dr. Wilson discreetly busied himself with his medical bag, allowing the new parents their moment of intimacy. When he had finished his tasks, he approached the bed once more. "You've done well, Mrs. Blackwood," he said warmly. "Rest now. Your husband and I will see to things while you sleep." Fiona was already drifting toward slumber, her newborn daughter cradled securely against her breast. Matthew bent to kiss her forehead, then followed the doctor into the main room of the cabin. "Congratulations," Dr. Wilson said, clapping him on the shoulder. "You're a fortunate man, Matthew." "I know it," he replied honestly. "More fortunate than I deserve." The doctor smiled, gathering his coat. "I'll check on them tomorrow, weather permitting. Keep the fire well stoked and make sure Fiona drinks plenty of that raspberry leaf tea I showed you how to brew." As the doctor prepared to depart, a small voice came from the doorway of Samuel's room. "Papa." Matthew turned to find his son standing there, tousled from sleep and confused by the early morning activity. He crossed the room in 3 strides and lifted the boy into his arms. "Samuel," he said gently, "you have a little sister. Would you like to see her?" The toddler's eyes widened. "Baby." "Yes, a baby," Matthew confirmed, carrying him quietly to where Fiona and Laura slept. "But we must be very quiet. Mama and the baby are resting." Samuel peered solemnly at the tiny bundle in his mother's arms. "My sister," he said, not a question but a statement of fact. "That's right," Matthew said, his heart swelling with pride and love. "Her name is Laura, and she's going to need her big brother to help take care of her." Samuel considered this responsibility with all the seriousness a 2-year-old could muster, then nodded decisively. "I help," he promised. Matthew hugged his son close, marveling at how complete his life had become. From the emptiness of his wandering years to this moment, a wife, a son, and now a daughter who carried his sister's name into a new generation, after seeing Dr. Wilson off, Matthew returned to find Samuel carefully placing his favorite wooden horse on the bed beside his sleeping mother and sister. "For baby," he explained when Matthew questioned him. "To play." "That's very kind," Matthew said, lifting his son into his arms. "But Laura is too little for toys just yet. Soon, though." He carried Samuel to the kitchen and set about preparing breakfast, keeping the boy entertained with stories as they allowed Fiona and the baby to rest. Outside, the snow continued to fall, enveloping the homestead in a peaceful blanket of white, isolating them in their own perfect world. Throughout that winter, the Blackwoods settled into their new routine as a family of 4. Laura proved to be a content baby, with her mother's calm disposition and her father's observant nature. Samuel embraced his role as big brother with enthusiasm, bringing his toys for Laura's inspection and reading to her from his picture books. By spring, when the snows melted and the prairie burst into bloom, Laura was sitting up, reaching for her brother with delighted giggles that never failed to make Matthew's heart swell with pride. Fiona recovered her strength quickly, resuming her duties with the added joy of watching her children bond. On a warm day in May, just over a year since Matthew had learned of Fiona's second pregnancy, the family picnicked beside the creek that bordered their property. Samuel, now an energetic toddler, splashed in the shallow water under his father's watchful eye, while Fiona sat on a blanket, nursing Laura in the dappled shade of a cottonwood tree. "I've been thinking," Matthew said, settling beside his wife after ensuring Samuel was safely occupied. "About expanding the cattle operation." Fiona looked up with interest. "Oh, Henderson's place to the north is for sale," he explained. "His wife wants to move back east to be near her family. It would double our grazing land and the creek runs through it too." He hesitated. "It's a big investment, but I think we could manage it." Fiona considered this, her fingers absently stroking Laura's soft curls. "Do you want it?" she asked simply. "I think it could secure our future," Matthew replied. "Give the children more opportunities." "But it would mean more work, at least at first." She smiled, the same smile that had first captured his heart. "Then we'll do it together, as we've done everything else." Matthew leaned over to kiss her, still amazed at how this woman's strength and faith continued to inspire him. "Together," he agreed. As the years passed, the Blackwood Ranch flourished, becoming one of the most respected operations in the territory. Matthew's fair dealings and hard-working nature earned him the respect of his peers, while Fiona's kindness and hospitality made their home a gathering place for neighbors and travelers alike. Samuel grew into a thoughtful young man with his father's height and his mother's compassionate spirit. By his 12th birthday, he was already showing a talent for working with horses that promised a bright future. Laura, with her mother's auburn hair and her father's blue eyes, developed a love of books and learning that led her to excel in the Silver Creek School. Her quick mind and gentle manner made her a favorite of teachers and classmates alike. 2 more children joined the family over the years: Michael, born when Laura was 3, and Emma, who arrived 2 years later. The Blackwood home, once a lonely widow's struggling homestead, rang with children's laughter and the comfortable sounds of a loving family. On the 10th anniversary of their marriage, Matthew surprised Fiona with a trip to San Francisco, a 2-week journey by train that would be their first real vacation since their wedding. The children would stay with trusted neighbors, allowing their parents a rare opportunity to be simply husband and wife rather than the center of a busy household. The night before their departure, after the children were asleep, Matthew found Fiona on the porch, gazing at the stars just as she had on that fateful day when he first rode into her life. "Having second thoughts?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. She leaned back against his chest, covering his hands with her own. "Not about the trip," she said, "just remembering." "What?" "The day you found us," she said softly. "Samuel so sick in my arms, me with no hope left, and then you appeared like an answer to a prayer I was too afraid to speak." Matthew tightened his embrace. "I was just a man passing by," he demurred. Fiona turned in his arms to face him. "You were never just a man passing by, Matthew Blackwood. You were the man who stopped, who saw a desperate mother and child and chose to help instead of continuing on your way." Her eyes, still as green and beautiful as the day they met, held his gaze. "You said you'd find a doctor and ride until he came, and you did." "Best decision I ever made," Matthew said with feeling. "For both of us," Fiona agreed, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. Later, as they lay in bed, planning their journey and anticipating the rare freedom of time alone together, Matthew reflected on the twists of fate that had led him to this life. Had he taken a different trail that day, had he ignored the woman on the porch with a sick child in her arms, how empty his existence would have remained. "What are you thinking about?" Fiona asked, noting his contemplative expression. "How close I came to missing all of this," he admitted. "If I hadn't happened to pass by your homestead that day." She propped herself up on one elbow, her hair falling in a curtain around her face. "I believe you would have found us somehow," she said with conviction, "or we would have found you. Some things are meant to be, remember." Matthew smiled, drawing her down for a kiss. "I remember," he murmured against her lips, "and I'm grateful every day that I was meant to be yours." Their journey to San Francisco was everything they had hoped for: exciting, romantic, a chance to rediscover each other away from the daily demands of ranch life and parenthood. They returned refreshed and even more deeply connected, ready to face whatever challenges the future might hold. And challenges there were, as with any frontier life. Drought years that threatened the cattle, a fire that destroyed part of the barn, requiring neighbors to rally for a rebuilding, Samuel's broken leg after being thrown from a half-wild Mustang he was attempting to train. Through it all, Matthew and Fiona faced each difficulty together, their partnership growing stronger with each obstacle overcome. Their home became known throughout the region as a place of warmth and welcome, where travelers could find a hot meal and good company, where neighbors gathered to celebrate harvests and holidays. As their children grew toward adulthood, Matthew and Fiona watched with pride as each developed their unique talents and dreams. Samuel's gift with horses blossomed into a successful horse breeding operation that complemented the family's cattle ranch. Laura's academic abilities earned her a place at a prestigious women's college in the East, a separation that was painful for her parents, but necessary for her growth. Michael showed an aptitude for business that promised to expand the family enterprises in new directions, while Emma's artistic talents captured the beauty of their frontier home in paintings that eventually found their way to galleries in Denver and beyond. 20 years after Matthew had first ridden to find a doctor for a dying baby, he stood with Fiona on the porch of their substantially expanded home, watching their grandchildren, Samuel's twins, a boy and girl aged 3, play in the yard under the watchful eye of their mother. "Did you ever imagine this?" Fiona asked, her hand warm in his. At 45, she was still beautiful to him, the silver threading through her auburn hair only enhancing her natural grace. Matthew shook his head, his arm tightening around her waist. "Not even in my wildest dreams," he admitted. "When I was riding from place to place, never staying long enough to put down roots, I couldn't have imagined finding such completeness." "Completeness," Fiona repeated, smiling. "Yes, that's exactly right. We completed each other." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Wilson, now white-haired and stooped with age, but still practicing his profession with steady hands and sharp mind. The elderly physician dismounted slowly from his horse, accepting Matthew's assistance with a nod of thanks. "I was passing by and thought I'd stop to see how young Laura is progressing," he said, referring to their eldest daughter's recent return from college with news of her engagement to a promising young lawyer. "She's inside writing letters to her fiancé," Fiona said with a smile. She'll be delighted to see you." As they walked toward the house, Dr. Wilson paused, looking around at the prosperous ranch with evident satisfaction. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "I've delivered hundreds of babies in my time, but I've never forgotten that night ride to save your Samuel. Strangest thing, I was actually planning to retire that week. Had already told folks in Silver Creek I was heading back east to live with my daughter." Matthew and Fiona exchanged surprised glances. "You never mentioned that before," Matthew said. The doctor shrugged. "Changed my mind after that night. Figured if a cowboy could ride 40 miles through darkness to save a child he didn't even know, I could keep practicing medicine a while longer." He chuckled. 20 years longer, as it turned out. "We're grateful you did," Fiona said warmly, taking the elderly man's arm. "You've been part of every important moment in our family's life. And you've been the finest example of what a family should be," Dr. Wilson replied. "A testament to what can happen when people choose love and commitment over fear and isolation." Later that evening, after their guests had departed and the house had settled into nighttime quiet, Matthew found Fiona in their bedroom, looking at a small wooden box she kept on her dressing table. Inside were treasured mementos, a lock of each child's hair, the pressed wildflowers from their wedding, the first letter Laura had sent from college. As he watched, she removed a worn piece of paper, unfolding it carefully. With a start, Matthew recognized it as the prescription doctor. Wilson had written for Samuel during that first desperate night. "You kept that?" he asked, surprised. Fiona nodded, her fingers tracing the faded writing. "To remind me," she said softly. "Of what?" She replaced the paper in the box and turned to face him, her eyes luminous in the lamplight. "That life can change in an instant, that a stranger can become the center of your world. That sometimes, when all hope seems lost, help comes riding out of nowhere." She crossed the room to him, taking his hands in hers. "That love can begin with a promise kept." Matthew drew her into his arms, overcome once more by the miracle of their shared life. "I promised I'd find a doctor and ride until he came," he murmured against her hair. "But I never imagined I was really riding toward my future, toward you. And I never imagined that watching you gallop away that day wouldn't be an ending, but a beginning," Fiona replied. "The beginning of everything that matters." Outside their window, the vast prairie stretched under a canopy of stars, the same stars that had witnessed their first meeting 20 years before. The homestead that had once been a lonely widow's desperate struggle for survival now stood as the heart of a thriving ranch, a testament to what could be built when two people faced life's challenges together. From a chance encounter on a dusty porch, a sick baby, a desperate mother, a cowboy's promise had grown a legacy of love that would endure for generations to come. A legacy that began when her baby lay weak in her arms and the cowboy said, "I'll find a doctor and ride until he comes."